All right, welcome back to another Q&A with Professor Dave Berri. As always, our guest of honor is Dave Berri, professor of Southern Utah University economics. Wow, messed that up, Dave. Author of several books, three textbook and two books now, Stumbling on Wins and Wages on Wins, and regular author at Forbes. Say hey, Dave.
Hey, how you doing?
You can find Dave on Twitter as Wages of Wins. And as mentioned, he writes regularly at Forbes, and that's what this podcast is all about. Hopefully once a week. You've had a busy couple of weeks, Dave, so we haven't talked in a bit. You also changed up your schedule. You started going Sunday afternoon, which is apparently the ideal time to post. I've tried to follow in your footsteps by not doing that for 3 weeks in a row, but I intend to eventually. So we're going to talk at least your most recent piece, which is on the Cleveland Cavaliers. So today you released a piece. I forget the exact title. I liked it, but basically the numbers point to a very obvious reason the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are struggling. As of this recording, they have a losing record. I believe they have the worst defense in the NBA or close to it. When we recorded the Tuesday podcast, they did. And you just said DWade and Derrick Rose were terrible acquisitions.
Yeah, it's the point of the piece is that what coaches do, and I think fans do this too, is that they'll look at a team and they'll say, well, they're struggling, and they'll focus on something like defense. Say, well, their defense is bad. And I think what you can do with numbers that I think is neat is that you can point to specific players. So if you say something like their defense is bad, but it's specific players that are producing the outcome. I mean, that's the big thing. There are very specific players who are producing this sort of outcome. And if you go through the numbers, it's specific players that are producing the outcome are J.R. Smith, Derrick Rose, DWade, and to some extent Jay Crowder. Those are the players who are to blame for the outcome. The other players, LeBron James, Kevin Love, Kyle Korver, they're not the problem. And so the Cavaliers went out and got two really old guards who aren't very good anymore. And they would have been great if it was 2011, but it's not. And so they're struggling and they're trying. And if you look at, well, why are you struggling? These are the players who are responsible for this. And I think I can understand why a coach doesn't want to call out players in the press. But if you're going to make decisions about a team, you have to be honest about what's going on. And you got to call out players individually on your own team, and you got to know who's helping, who's not helping. And so often it's the case when we don't know what they're telling the players, but when you look at their decisions and the choices they make, you can infer what they're thinking. And often it's the case in the NBA. Teams don't know why they're losing or why they're winning. They do seem to often fall into, well, we're just not doing this all together or something like that. And I don't think that's what basketball, how it works. I think it is a case that you can point out specific players. You change these players, you'll change your outcomes.
Well, what I did like too about your point about not knowing what they're doing is he's a little deceptive on the box score geeks because we just do total numbers. But Derrick Rose, for instance, if we run down the top 5 minutes getters on the Cavaliers, they're LeBron James and Kevin Love, who we have traditionally thought are very great, and this season still think are great. Then J.R. Smith, then Derrick Rose, then, as we noted, Jay Crowder, who's a little rough, and we might talk him a little more. But I mean, yeah, it's if the team is being honest with themselves, like you noted, they wouldn't keep playing the wrong players. And this is what we do notice, is that even if I've heard this kind of stupid myth forever, when you talk to somebody about a team and they go, well, Dave Berri says this on Wages of Wins, but of course the team has a much more advanced analytics squad that has much more complicated stats. This was back in the day too, when, for instance, the sports VU data that is now publicly available at NBA.com wasn't readily available. That Synergy Sports, which I kind of miss, I wish was still publicly available, was kind of in its infancy, so not publicly available. So they could say they have more advanced stats that we don't have, so they're making better decisions. Now a lot of that data has gone public, and then we just watch their decision making and go, clearly you have not gotten the memo that J.R. Smith, who has only ever been a volume shooter from three, essentially, is now horrible. He doesn't do anything else, and he is horrible at shooting. The one thing you got him for, he can't do. So why is he the third highest minutes getter on your team?
Exactly. I think that's, and they all, yeah, we've heard that for years, that the stats people, the teams hire, are somehow know things. That's a little hard to believe when you think about who's doing the hiring, because the hiring is being done by people who don't know stats. And so it's really difficult to know who to hire and who not to hire when you don't understand what product you're buying. And we've seen a lot of evidence that teams hire models and ideas that just don't stand up very well to scrutiny. And so
It's funny.
it's neat to go through it and just take a look at the numbers and walk the reader through. We can actually go through and pick out specific players. I wish this was more often done in other sports. I think you could do the same kind of analysis in baseball. But you don't often, it doesn't seem like you see that as often. It doesn't seem like people are willing to write articles where they call out people by name. And I suspect the problem for the media is that they have to interact with players. And I imagine it's going to be uncomfortable walking into a locker room if you just wrote an article saying, J.R. Smith, you're the problem. I don't know that J.R. Smith wants to talk to you anymore after that.
Yeah, I've heard.
Don't have that problem. I'm not going to talk to these people.
Definitely heard access. I mean, criticizing the team as well. It's something I struggle with kind of regularly because I bash the Nuggets on a regular basis. And as I've done this for years and years, I have met more people in front offices and they seem like nice people. So it gets rough. But, for instance, no matter how much you love a team, there is this breaking point. I had an article about Kenneth Faried recently where I just said, you are just being wrong. Like there's no way to sugarcoat this. This is a bad decision. And as much as I might like the team, we can't get around that. And I mean, you even just said buy models. I mean, this year, even using PER, which we've noted PER is a flawed model. At this point in the NBA, if you quote PER to me, I just know that you don't know stats. I mean, there's no two ways about it. If you use PER for anything, you have just admitted to me that I should not listen to you on advanced statistics. I'm sorry. DWade and Derrick Rose are terrible this season, according to that. So, it's kind of like the team bought a reputation and thought these players used to win. I got them. They should win. It's very much the model you've done for years and years. You've talked college sports. And the model that teams use when they draft players is, were they on a winning squad? And instead of saying, were they responsible for the winning, they look for that. And they're making the same mistake here. The Cavs said, we need to win. So what if we get a finals MVP and a regular season MVP? Isn't that enough? Instead of going, can we get good players?
Exactly. Yeah. And teams also seem to struggle. They just seem to have a lot of trouble with the idea of age. Dwayne Wade's 35 years old. At this point, I think you got to look at him and go, I don't think you can contribute anymore. There's a lot of old players who used to be great. Bill Russell's still a free agent. You go get him.
Yeah, it was Bob Bulgaris made this point. He said you should not be allowed to call when you are doing like the biography of a player on your squad. You should not be allowed to use former accolades if they're way in the past. So you shouldn't be able to say the Cavaliers signed MVP caliber guard Derrick Rose. That was what 2011. That's a player's career ago at this point.
Yeah, that's a lot. What he's done recently, he's been consistently below average. And it's interesting when you look. When I was, the great thing about Box Score Geeks, you can go through and look at the individual numbers and see what the story is behind the wins produced number. And when you look at Derrick Rose, his shooting efficiency is not awful. He's pretty much average, which he's not been most of his career. But his assist numbers and his turnover numbers are horrible. I don't think Derrick Rose is, passing the ball very well at all. And it could be, you're deferring to LeBron James, but if you're going to use LeBron James as your point and convert Derrick Rose into a shooting guard, that seems like a horrible idea because historically he can't shoot, and so that's probably not the direction you want to go into. So I think it's pretty clear why the team is struggling. I did note at the end it's not hopeless. Isaiah Thomas is pretty close to coming back, they say. And if Isaiah Thomas comes back and Derrick Rose gets off the court, that could be a huge upgrade.
Of course, I'm gonna quote you back to you, and I mean we're seeing this problem in teams like Dallas, teams like Denver. I was even happy with my own Bucks for just trading Greg Monroe for a player they were going to play because Greg Monroe is a player that we have said is good, that the Pistons said was good, that the Bucks at least by their wallet said was good, and then they signed him and didn't play him. We have noticed forever that we say this good player will play, can come on and help this team if he plays and this other player doesn't play. Because that's the scary thing. In your article, you essentially noted if you just got Dwayne Wade and Derrick Rose off the court with loath to use this term, but I will because most sites use this kind of like a replacement level player. So we compare to average because that's how you should do this if we're grading a team. But a replacement level player meaning 0 wins, nothing. Like a G League player that just got on the court and didn't do a lot but wasn't horrible. They would improve their regular season expected wins by 7 at this point.
Yeah,
So,
they right now be on pace to win 45 games.
but with that said, it's still very likely. I'll give one more anecdote and then maybe talk one other thing before we end because I know you have to leave in about 5 minutes. Dwayne Wade, after this team starts horribly, he calls out the team. He questions the starters, which this is a brilliant maneuver. And right after he does that, he has a good game. So what amused me here is Dwayne Wade is part of why this team is horrible. Dwayne Wade was able to go in the media and say, I'm calling out our team for bad performance. And then he just happened to luck into having a good game. So people are going to go, yeah, why aren't they listening to the veteran leadership of Dwayne Wade? With Dwayne Wade and his team.
We talk about these little pieces we do about the writing process. And I was going to actually talk about that and build around Dwayne Wade's comment. I didn't ultimately put that in. But I was thinking about that as sort of a way of framing the story, is that Wade clearly is blaming somebody. And he's blaming the starters. He's partly right, to the extent Derrick Rose is the starter, Derrick Rose to blame. But the problem is Wade's also to blame, and he's on the second unit. So it's the first and second team are both, they have players who can be blamed on these things. And so it's not just Rose, it's not just Wade, it's both these guys. So it was interesting going through this and looking at the numbers and looking at which players were awful. And I wish this was more often done. I just wish people would do this. And when I think about in baseball, the Detroit Tigers, how they had ended up with the worst year in baseball, and it started off with they could have been contenders. But if you look at the numbers, Miguel Cabrera dropped off considerably. Jordan Zimmerman, one of their starting pitchers, dropped off considerably. If those two players don't drop off, the Tigers remain in contention throughout the summer. They don't trade Justin Verlander. They don't trade Justin Upton. They stay in contention the whole season, and their outcome is very different. So it's two specific players produce the outcome that you observe. And I think sports analysis would be better if people just did it that way and said, instead of saying, the team didn't do something, the stats let you identify who's responsible. So use the stats and say, it's not the team's fault, it's these two guys' fault.
Well, we'll end on this one, at least this segment, but like Jay Crowder's an interesting one because he's played well for multiple teams now, right? He was picked up by Dallas, I believe, played above average in Dallas, was traded to Boston where he played very well. And he's not playing that hot, even and no. We're being about as generous as possible. You can go and say honestly to yourself, Jay Crowder is playing poorly, but we can look at his numbers. I haven't done this yet, but as I mentioned, there's sports.nba or stats.nba.com data on touches and things. You can look at shooting efficiency. Has he changed where he's taking a shot from? If you're a coach, you could look at film, maybe he's shooting differently, whatever. There's lots of stuff you can do to look at why Jay Crowder isn't doing well. In the case of Dwayne Wade and J.R. Smith and Derrick Rose, it's actually a lot easier. If you look at the last 3 years, and again, what I love about you, at one point in your time back when the Bulls were actually good with Derrick Rose, you were quoted in an article about Derrick Rose. Was it Garpax? It was either Garpax or the coach. I forget who. But they quoted your research on the age curve because they were so excited about what Derrick Rose was going to become because he's an MVP in 2011. He's super young then. And he had an article on the age curve that you had written saying he's only going to get better. The research supports this. And of course, years later, teams are ignoring your research on the age curve, which has the exact opposite, which is when they get Pat in their 30s, pretty much every sport is just a crapshoot what they're going to turn into.
Yeah, it is. By the time an NBA guard is 35 years old, like Wade, or J.R. Smith is 32, you should not be playing these guys major minutes. They're just old, and I realize they look the same. I'm sure they feel the same.
Wade does not look the same. If you look at his pictures, he looks very much. He's grown out a beard. He looks very much more disheveled. I mean, you could even just look at a picture of Dwayne Wade in his prime with Miami when he won a Finals MVP, and Dwayne Wade now. And
yeah, but I bet if you ask LeBron, is Wade tremendously different than he was 5 years ago? I bet you LeBron would say, I can look past the beard and he looks like the same guy, and he's not.
that's why we hate the eye test. And actually, I'll just use this to give a shout out to one of your other pieces. Paul Pierce, has, you know, now that he's retired, has become a pundit, talks things, and he said that John Wall is the best guard in the NBA, or something to that effect. I don't know the qualifiers. Seems ridiculous to even say that, just being aware that James Harden and Steph Curry and Russell Westbrook, you know, and those three players, I think have got 70 to 80% of all the MVP votes in the last 3 seasons.
Yes.
So kind of bizarre to say it when those three are in the league. Worth noting that Paul Pierce is a former teammate of Wall's, so maybe that has something to do with it.
Yes, exactly.
But I think it is important to just realize that players, we want to believe that these people who are very good at this sport.
Oh, yes, exactly.
And it's very possible that they just don't. They don't understand what makes them good. The book that kind of puts your name on the map, Blink, he talks about this, where they're tennis players that would put spin on the ball, and they would do this motion, if you're watching live, with my wrist. And there are people that broke down the film and went, by the time they're doing that, the ball has left it. The action they are doing to put spin on the ball is not that, and that they're actually risking injury doing that. So they don't even understand what they are doing to put the spin on the ball. They know how to do it. But if you ask them to explain it to others, they can't. And so to your LeBron point, LeBron James may not.
That's a more recent example of this. It's from last night.
So what do we got?
The Cavaliers played the Mavericks last night. LeBron James decided to take a dig at Phil Jackson, the Knicks, and he said that the Knicks made a mistake passing on Dennis Smith. Dennis Smith is a great player, according to LeBron. He's phenomenal. He's also the worst player on the Mavs. LeBron doesn't know this.
It's still true, because, like, I mean, I made a dig at this on Twitter where I joked how a player just has to have one good game and everybody, like Devin Booker's a great example. We think he's a horrible player, but he is a player that's put up some great numbers. He had this amazing game last season. I think he put up 70 points. It's the highest points, and it was a good game. I'm not going to dispute that. But what was funny is he has one good game, and everybody's like, see those people that said Devin Booker is terrible. Can you believe it? This great game. And you're like, yeah, did you watch the other 79 games last season?
Yes. And that's the thing about Devin Booker. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. Is that, you know, people will rely on what they see in one game, or ESPN. We'll close with this observation. Paul Shirley, who we both know, a former NBA player, he put together a video of his highlights from the NBA. And if you watch the video, Paul Shirley in that video is amazing. He hits every single shot he takes. He doesn't miss a single one. His shooting percentage is 1,000%. You were to watch Paul Shirley, you'd say his wins produced is off the chart. Look at the highlights. And that's how so many people analyze basketball. They base it on the highlights. And in the highlights, nobody ever misses. Everybody looks great. You can make a highlight of any player and they'd look great. You can't go on the highlights. You got to go on the whole. And that's why we have numbers. Numbers tell you what they did all the time in every game they played. When you look at the numbers, you say, you know, yeah, I realize in the highlight he was 1,000%, but in every game he played, he shoots 40%. That's what he does. You know, it'd be so much better if the highlights would just honestly say, okay, you know, this guy's a 40% shooter. So this is what he did. He missed 6%. We're going to show you this miss. He missed this one. He missed this one. He missed this one. He missed this one.
One of my favorite pieces of tools that we don't have is Synergy Sports, which would let you actually do that. And I'll give a lot of credit to people who use the eye test. A major shout out to B-Ball Breakdown, Coach Nick, who does this, who will go through and anybody who edits film for YouTube. We do very little at Box Score Geeks, knows just how painful it is to watch the same thing over and over and over again to edit together what you need. When most people say the eye test, they mean, I watched the game, I wasn't paying attention, I noticed the highlight clips because they played them over and over and over in the commercial, you know, at the commercial breaks or during timeouts. That doesn't count. Final shout out, definitely to Paul Shirley. He just released a new book, Stories I Tell on Dates. Fantastic author. Can I Keep My Jersey is a great book. And then, yeah, I think his highlight reel, if you follow him on Twitter or Facebook, he's got that up. So it's a good one. Yeah, Dave, we're a little over 4:30, which is when you said you needed to go. I'll just let you tease what you're writing next week, and then I'll just give your credentials.
I don't know what I'm writing next week. It might be about the WNBA, but I'm not quite sure yet. I'm still thinking.
Up the style, because as mentioned, what we used to do is on Sundays we'd record this after you had already written a piece, and now what you've discovered is releasing a piece on Sunday gets more traffic. So now at this point we're discussing what you've written. So I guess we'll probably leave that to the wayside. So anyway, Dave Berri, Wages of Wins on Twitter. You can find him at Forbes.com/sites/David Berri, spelled just like you would expect. Hopefully we'll talk again in a week about whatever Dave decides to write. Thanks a lot, Dave.
All right. Thanks a lot, guy.